have taken my vinegar class before, you're welcome to pipe up if you have. And it sounds like a big no, but that's all right. Because if you had, you're going to see new things that you hadn't seen before. But so we'll get started with this. So first off, I'm going to show you my setup, which ordinarily people in this class don't get to see. So along with me, I will try not to make you sick, like I said. And I need to figure out how to reverse the camera. Okay. All right. So this, as I figure out how the camera goes, is my vinegar room, or more or less my hobby room. So what you can see here, or hopefully you can see here, are some of the barrels that I age various vinegars in. Let me see if I can reverse the camera. Hang on. Yay, now I can see what you're seeing. That makes it much easier. Okay, so this big guy here in front of you, this is the Orleans process. We'll talk about that later. But that's a 2-gallon container, and it's aging Pinot Noir vinegar right now. We've also got back here, this is the start of a Solera process. We'll talk about that too. That's what sherry vinegar is normally made in. And also many of your fine aged distilled liquors are made in a Solera process. So all those whiskeys and bourbons you love so much, same process. And then we have a Pinot Noir and a Chardonnay vinegar in the back here that are undergoing basically the balsamic process. So again, we'll talk about all these, but I wanted to show all this stuff to you before we got there. This, and I'm going to open it up, it's really high tech, right? I mean, it's a styrofoam cooler. But this is how I make the vinegars and keep them nice in that temperature. So basically, it's a seed germination pad on the bottom. I use, as you can see, half-gallon mason jars. I use a styrofoam cooler just to keep the heat on top of it. Nice temperature controller, just so you know what you're at. And let's see what else to show. They should stay as ciders, but you know, they might be vinegars someday, who knows? So I do have a collection of brew stuff under, and I have a cat in a trash can. Get out, come on, go. My assistant will be making cameos as we proceed in this.
Don't throw out a perfectly good cat.
I know. Let's see, what else do we have? So, this guy, there's a 20-liter barrel. And some other things in my vinegar room here. The Diet Pepsis obviously aren't raw materials, but some of the other things on the shelf are raw materials for vinegar. I want to come in here and show you these. These are mothers. So let's talk about the basic process since we're there, okay? Actually, we're gonna skip for a second. And then these are finished vinegars down here. We may come back here to see these in a minute. All right, so let me go back out and we'll start actually lecturing, and then we're gonna do. All right, how much of this can we get in? So this is a display board that I sometimes bring to various events. I don't expect you to read it. I just want you to show it to you. Especially this part in the middle. This is why I call it anti-brewing, okay? The top part is brewing, right? You take sugar and yeast, and you make alcohol, and that's an anaerobic process. It takes place without the presence of oxygen. Making vinegar, you take alcohol and a bacteria to make acid, acetic acid in this case, and that's an aerobic process. It takes oxygen to make it. In the battle between yeast and acid bacteria, the bacteria will always win because the yeast make the thing the bacteria wants, and the bacteria makes something that the yeast does not want. You will have brewing friends who'll say, I don't want your vinegar anywhere near me because it may throw their brews off. Similarly, people who make sourdough breads and sometimes make cheeses will get similar ideas from their brewers. Good sanitation is always your friend. You don't need it for making vinegar, you need it for making alcohol. So if you're going to make alcohol or bread or cheese in the same place you're making vinegars, just use really good sanitation, okay? That's what you need to do. So let's talk about some processes here. And here's another assistant for your edification. So in medieval, we don't know where vinegar came from. It's prehistory. As soon as nature decided to make alcohol, nature decided to make vinegar right afterwards. So there's wild yeast in the air. There's wild acid bacteria in the air. It's in your lungs. It's in your stomach. It's in your house. It's all around you. So you can't get away from it. But in the medieval time, there's two different ways of making vinegar. There's the surface method, which is primarily what we're going to do now, sort of, with mason jars instead of wooden casks. And then there's the Orleans method, which I talked to you about a minute ago with that big jar that I have. In the 1350s, the winemakers of Orleans figured out, hey, we can have a giant barrel, and it's probably like a 55-gallon barrel or more, full of wine, put 2 holes in it, stuff those holes with cotton or linen or some kind of fiber to keep the bugs out, and then a mother of vinegar will form, and we can continually make vinegar. We'll drain the cask about 75% every so often, fill it back up with wine, and then we'll always have vinegar. And this was important. One, vinegar is an excellent preservation method. It's actually a very good drink. Most of us are in the SCA probably, so secondment is familiar to many of you. But there are other things. It's a cooking method. It's a cleaning method. So just like your grandmother or your great-grandmother, medieval people used vinegar for all the same things that our Depression-era grandparents used vinegar for. And then we'll go down to types of vinegar. Many types of vinegar. This is important. The ABV of whatever you're doing must be below 20%. Ideally, it should be below 10%. Just above that, the alcohol kills the bacteria, and there's no good. So you'll use water to dilute. You can make vinegar out of almost anything as long as you push the alcohol volume down far enough, okay? So I started by taking my cordials, which I figured out were 32% ABV, mix them pretty much half and half with water, and that gets into the nice 16, which is still a little high, but it was enough to make it work. A couple of other things to point out on this. So mustard is important and related to vinegar and wine, incidentally. They would grow mustard in the vineyards to keep down weeds and other pests. And then they discovered that vinegar is a way to stop the production of the heat-producing chemicals in mustard. So you can make it as hot or as mild as you would like by adding enough vinegar. Shrubs I talked about quickly with secondment. Lemonade is our modern descendant of shrubs, and they've seen a resurgence in the bar scene and in other things. This is a question I was asked pretty early when I started displaying. Is balsamic vinegar period? Well, the word balsamic doesn't appear until 1747. But pretty much it looks like a duck, it quacks like a duck. It's a duck, okay? Balsamic vinegar is period. They just didn't call it that yet. The Duke of Medina had his own private special vinegar that he made, like I said in that sentence there, from 1228 to 1598. There are references to the Duke's special vinegar, and they made a gift of vinegar to the Holy Roman Emperor Henry II as well. So yes, balsamic vinegar is period. Another lecture piece, excuse me, assistant. There are many books out there on vinegar, but these are the two that you want more than anything else. The Vinegar Maker's Handbooks are by two Austrian chemists. Everything you want to know about the chemistry and how to make vinegar, from the simple method I'm going to show you to making your own generators, etc., is in that Vinegar Maker's Handbook. Any conceivable problem you will run into, they will talk about and show you how to overcome. So that is the book you really want if you're going to do this seriously. And then The Eternal Condiment is a book that came out fairly recently, I think September or October 2019. Mr. Smith here runs the Supreme Vinegar Company out of Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, and he researched the crap out of vinegar throughout the ages. So everything you want to know about the history of vinegar, you can learn in The Eternal Condiment. So are there questions on the lecture part so far? And then we're going to get into some fun stuff here in a minute. And you guys are free to unmute yourselves to ask whatever questions you like whenever you want. Don't hesitate about that, okay? All right, well, it doesn't look like there's any questions, so we're going to get on with doing some more fun things then. So normally, I would have you taste a bunch of vinegars, but we can't do that. So I'm going to show you how we make it, actually. So, oh, and I wanted to talk about the processes. Let me do that first. So I mentioned the balsamic process real quick over there. And the balsamic process, really what it is, to be real, authentic balsamic vinegar. I'm going to go back to that shot there. It has to be made from those grapes, and it has to be aged at least 12 years in specific casks in the caves of Italy. It is a protected appellation in the European common market. Unless you paid, the equivalent of $100 per liter, whatever you bought here in the States is not really balsamic vinegar. It's a chemically close thing. It's a knockoff. So when I say the balsamic process, I am not making balsamic vinegar. I am making something similar to balsamic vinegar. So what that really is aging in wood for a long period of time. That's what those two barrels are out there. I talked about the Solera process real quick. That is arguably just on the edge of period. And how that works is you would have many barrels, ideally spaced 6 months apart. So you start with, let's say you start with a sherry vinegar and you let it go at least 18 months so you've got the first part of your Solera. Then every 6 months after that, you would mix younger vinegar with the older vinegar before you bottled and sold or distributed it. This gives it complexity and gives you a nice mix of the sharpness of the younger vinegar with the mellowness of really long-aged vinegar. And like I said, it's how a lot of your fancy distilled spirits are made. So those are the two big processes when it comes to vinegar. All right, so how do we do this? So here's a quick shot of things that I actually use, not the spices. Sorry, I should have thought a little bit more about that. Though you can make infused vinegars once you've made your vinegar if you want to. That's easy. So I've got 2 half-gallon jars there. These dissolvable ball jar labels are amazing. I really suggest you get your stuff. That's the little green box that's there. 2 mothers, and then I've got a beer that I decided I didn't like, so we're going to turn that into vinegar. And then one of my staples is Sauvignon Blanc to make a white wine vinegar. Just like cooking, don't use something you wouldn't actually drink to make your vinegars with. A 5 or 6 bottle of wine is fine. Normally when I make a malt vinegar, I'm using like Blue Moon honey wheat ale, anything you can get inexpensively, but you still theoretically would actually drink it, works great. So I'm going to switch the camera view and put this down and start doing things. Let's see here. And that's not a good angle. All right. I'm not sure I can get the camera pointing where I need to. There, that's not too bad. Okay. So to make a vinegar with a wine, like I said, you want to push your ABV ideally below 10. Most wines are going to be about 14 to 16, depending on how strong they are. Screw tops are nice, but certainly you can cork them out. So 1 bottle of wine. Oops. Feel free to yell at me when I'm not in shot either. Two cups of water. That's not in shot. All right, so 2 cups of water is about 500 milliliters. Normally, your normal bottles of wine you buy anymore are 750 milliliters. So we've not quite cut it in half. So this should be about the 8 to 9% ABV area now. Modern wines, especially, are full of sulfates to stop the exact process that we're trying to do. You have to get that metasulfate out of solution. There's 2 ways to do it, and I use both of them anymore, especially on white wines. I found white wines to be particularly resistant to vinegarization. I don't know why that is. It just seems to be the way it is. So the first method is cap off your bottle, actually put the solid lid on it, and you're going to shake this thing for 10 minutes. I found that Megadeth's Almost Honest is not a bad tune to be humming along or singing to as you do this, but whatever you can. I'm going to set a timer real quick to shake it up. So pretty vigorously, and I know it's going to be boring. You're going to watch me shake things for 10 minutes, but it does help get it out of solution, and it's going to be necessary. So again, another for comments or questions while we do this would be a great time to do that.
I was wondering what you find would be the easiest thing to start with as a base. Is wine the easiest, or would a beer be easier?
Beers and ciders, and we're going to do a beer next, and we won't have to shake those. Our easiest. Cider is exceedingly easy for whatever reason. Mostly, I think, because it's usually in the 5 to 7% ABV range, and so it likes to turn pretty easily. So, good question. I find ciders to be the easiest thing to turn.
Thank you.
A lot of this is going to be personal preference as well. When I started, which was almost 2 years ago now, I'm the kind of guy, I'm going to make one of every single wine I can get my hands on to figure out which one I like the most. So I had, like 4 or 5 different reds and 4 or 5 different whites wines before I started deciding I want that one in particular. So it's on your own preference. Prosecco makes a nice wine too, and nice vinegar as well, but it is also a bit of a problem child in terms of turning. And if you get corked Prosecco, get really good at uncorking it, or half of it will be all over your kitchen. Yeah, ask me how I know. Other thoughts or questions?
So what is it about the
paint mixer?
process that makes the sulfites go away?
So what is it about this that makes the sulfites go away? They're just suspended in solution. So the agitation kind of gets the SO2 gas out of solution. We probably will hear an audible pop when I take this off. It's not going to smell of sulfur necessarily. There's not that much sulfur in it, But yeah, the agitation does let it go. The other thing I do, and we're going to get there, and I'm not going to take the full 10 minutes because this is going to be ridiculous for you guys to watch me shake a bottle for 10 minutes. So just another minute on this, and then I'll do the second method, which also helps get rid of the sulfates. And then I'll tell you what I usually end up have to do after all of that, because problem child decided not to turn. The other thing this does, like I said, vinegarization is an aerobic process. All those bubbles in there, that's air getting in there, and that's going to help give our mother a jump start to get this rolling. So you really, modernly, do this with a generative method. What takes weeks to months to do as a surface method can be done in hours. So if you really want to do this and you want to do it quickly, you can get an air bubbler, like for an aquarium. And
Paint mixer. Get a paint mixer.
Yes. Occasionally I have to do that. But if you get like a bubbler for an aquarium or something, you're constantly putting oxygen in the solution. That'll go pretty quick. Also having a lot of surface points for air to adhere to. So what they figured out in the 1800s is if they put balsa wood, lots of chips of that in there, the air bubbles attached to that, and each of those points is a place where vinegar can form, so it went a lot faster. All right, so that's about 4 minutes, 4.5 minutes. We'll stop. It should be a full 10. Maybe you heard that. So there's some air and gas escaping. So we got at least some of the sulfites out of there. The other thing to do, just take your topical grade hydrogen peroxide. You can measure it if you want to be that guy, but 3 to 5 milliliters. It's going to break down. It's going to become water and oxygen pretty quick, but it will also, as it becomes radical, those become radicals, they're going to bind with those sulfates and push them out of solution again. So both of those things will help a lot. Now, when I said problem child, after a couple weeks when you go, this hasn't turned, get out your handy dandy immersion blender. And take off the top, run the immersion blender for a few moments, not more than a minute or two. And that'll aerate it, and that'll also help out the mother. Okay, so this is a jar that I bought from the Supreme Vinegar Company. This is a white wine mother. Now, I will say this. I have not noticed any significant difference between the actual mothers, depending on how they're listed. There's a red wine, they do a rice wine, malt, cider, etc. What they're referring to really is the liquid that the mother is in. I have not noticed any way, shape, or form that the actual acid-bacteria mother makes a difference. It makes, so like a red wine mother, though, is going to be red because it's going to take on the tannins and take on the color. So if you use that in a white wine, you may get a pink vinegar. So aesthetically, you may not want to use it, but there's no difference between one or the other. And you can harvest mothers as they grow. So just take the whole jar, throw it in there. I save the jar, and like I said, periodically it will make another mother, and I will show you mothers like that in a minute. Take a piece of cheesecloth, or this is actually butter muslin.
Could you move that into the frame?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Your jar is out of the frame.
Oh, this jar. I'm sorry. So here's the full jar. There's not, the mother is very small. It's kind of hidden in the bubbles at the top right now. Sorry about that. Okay. So just take a piece of cheesecloth, put it over the top. Take the retaining ring, screw it on. So you want to keep air flowing in there, and it's only going to convert at the surface of the jar. That's why an air bubbler or other methods work faster by continually putting oxygen in. This will attract fruit flies and vinegar flies. I have not been able to tell the difference, but they're roughly the same size. So things that could happen while we're waiting for this to go is, like I said, the white wines are problematic. So if after 2 weeks you're not smelling vinegar on the top of this, you may want to take a look. And if you don't have a mother floating on top of the liquid at that point, that may be the time to put the immersion blender in there and mix it all back up. What the immersion blender is also going to do is chop up whatever mother you do have. That's not a problem. What it does is it forces, the mother is basically a protein sheath that the bacteria hide in when the conditions aren't what they like it to be. So you're forcing the bacteria back out into the liquid to make them work. But it also means when it comes time to bottle and do something with this, if you don't want all of those particles of mother floating in your solution, you then have to strain it to get them out. But anyway, with this is pretty much it. You put this under that styrofoam container and let it go for a couple weeks. Could be as long as 8 weeks before you get a full conversion. And so that is how you deal with wines or higher alcohol vinegars. Any questions or thoughts on that?
What temperature is your heating mat at?
Oh, good question. I keep it at 80 just because I found the bacteria likes to be warmer. But it should be anything above 65. But if you get above 70, it'll do much better. When I started and I didn't have a mat, I was on my porch in June and it got quite toasty. You will see some things say that don't put it into sunlight. I never found that was a problem. So if you've got high sun that's going to keep things nice and warm, it probably will be okay. The bacteria will outgrow any deaths that the UV radiation may be causing. Other questions or thoughts? Okay. So the process isn't that different for a beer or a cider. So this was let's see. This is a dill pickle sour ale that a local brewery produced. I thought it would be an interesting idea, and it was interesting. It just was not to my tastes. So now it gets to be vinegar, and this is the problem that I have with alcohol. As I have any alcohol and I go, I wonder what kind of vinegar that'll make. Like for beers and ciders, you really don't need to agitate. Well, you don't need to agitate or do any of that kind of thing. They're generally going to be much lower in alcohol volume, so you're fine. So just empty, 3 or 4 cans, whatever it takes to fill up. Of course, you have to wait for the foam to subside, depending on how bad your pour is. That was pretty crap. Don't tell Verena. I can pour beer better than that. In the meantime, I'm going to wait for that to go down. Let me show you what a mother looks like when they're formed. They will take the shape of whatever container they were in. So that right there is a mother that I've harvested out of one of these half-gallon jars. Some things look like mothers, and you need to be aware of that. So a yeast film or a mold, you might go, is that a mother or not? A mother is going to be solid, continuous, have the same thickness throughout. A yeast film is going to be almost like an oil slick on the top of your liquid, and it's not going to get any bigger. Mold tend to be like islands, if you will. floating around. Skim, if those things happen, skim them off. Usually the liquid underneath is fine. Just skim off the top and you should be ready to continue. So I'm not really sure what this is going to taste like when it's all done. So one concern that people sometimes have is preserving, right? You're making all this vinegar, you want to make pickles or you want to preserve food with it. Is it safe to do so? I do have samples out for testing. That was before all of this crazy COVID stuff started happening. So that may be a while. Ideally, though, it is a 1-to-1 conversion between percentage alcohol and percentage acid at the end of the day. As with all chemistry, for those of you who know, there are incomplete reactions. There's things that don't go quite right. So it's not, in practice, it's not 100%, but it's going to be pretty close. So canning guidelines are you want to be at least 5% or higher acidity of the fine you can to make sure you destroy any botulism spores. So that's something to consider with your vinegars, is making sure you get the right acidity out of it. Ideally, it will be 1-to-1. And that can be a problem with alegars, is what the beers are called. And ciders is sometimes their percent alcohol is low to start with. I've seen some ciders and some beers as low as 3 to 4%. So consider that if you're gonna want to do canning or preserving with what you've got. And this foam is being really so you don't get as much loss. You do get some loss in the jars. I don't know if you guys have heard of the phrase "the angel share." It's also something you hear about in aging alcohols in wood. So you get evaporation, and you lose part of whatever you're doing to the evaporation. So these on those heating mats, I will get a little bit of loss. The barrels tend to have more loss just because wood is porous. For wood barrels, you do want to keep them as full as you possibly can, though part of the aging process is debt reduction. Part of what makes balsamic vinegar so good is you have basically condensed it into a syrup as you lost water out of it. So balance whatever you're doing there. And I know I built this up to be a lot more exciting than it was. I am sorry. Other thoughts or questions? There is one alcohol so far that I have failed to turn into vinegar. Anyone want to guess what that might be? Any Chicagoans amongst us? You guys will probably, that should be a good hint.
Lord.
So Malort.
Exactly. Malort will not turn. Wormwood is an antimicrobial, and Malort is a wormwood liqueur. It took me a while to figure that one out. I'm like, why? This stuff is so bad, it won't become vinegar.
Yeah, I was going to say absinthe then wouldn't either.
Probably not. Yep. So that's something to consider, is what are your additives? They may interfere with your bacteria. But yeah, Malort was the one stubborn one that would not go. All right. And that's probably enough. So we'll pour hopefully we're not going to foam up some more. The vinegar is actually reducing the foam. And pop. All right, so like I said, in a couple weeks, you should start to smell vinegar. If you don't, then you may have to agitate it some more. Beers and ciders, that's almost never a problem, so I wouldn't worry about that so much. The mother, I've seen conflicting reports that it only works if it's floating at the top. And then I've seen things that suggest that no, it's good if it's floating at the top, but it's not necessary that it be floating at the top. I personally haven't seen it been too much of a problem. So if it's floating, great, you're doing good. If it's not, it may not be warm enough, or it may be too alcoholic. Again, for beers and ciders, that's usually not a problem.
I missed it.
Go ahead.
What kind of mother did you put in there?
That was so that was a malt mother. I will reuse these jars and I'll put a label on them if it's not what it says on the label. Let me get this in shot. So, and I have no idea if these are backwards for you guys or not. So that's it says malt vinegar on the bottom there.
The words are good.
Okay. Usually after, again, 2-3 weeks, maybe more, you'll form new mothers. You can harvest those off, put them in jars, put a little bit of vinegar or liquid of any wine or any alcohol or vinegar in there with that mother and save it and use it again. So ideally, you don't have to buy mothers very often. Now, if you've ended up using the immersion blender and destroy them, you might want a more solid mast mother. Again, that's the only reason I rebuy is if I've done something like that. But once you've bought 2 or 3 and you've done this for a little while, you'll have dozens of mothers that can keep going. And then I would put these under the styrofoam container and wait for a while. And that is pretty much the process, and it can be done for any alcohol.
Harvest the mother and you put it in a jar. You use the solid lid or a cheesecloth lid?
Oh, when I'm putting it in a jar to preserve forever, you put a solid lid on it. One, you don't want the liquid in there to evaporate. It's just kind of, you're more or less kind of putting the mother in suspended animation. I was fortunate that Bougie, for those of you who know Bougie from Arrington, gifted me a 200-year-old mother for my Orleans process. So they can, as long as you harvest them and keep them in a liquid between uses, they are good for a long time. You can also then chop them up and give portions to other people who are doing their own vinegar making or whatever. The bacteria are more or less swimming in the liquid. Some of them are in the mother, and they will reproduce and make more. I've yet to find cooks who do not want vinegar. So that was one of the reasons I went this way. It's extremely useful, but it's also a consumable, right? So it's not like it's sitting around doing nothing. It gets cooked with, it gets made into cheese. I see Tegan nodding her head. And so unlike alcohol, where some people go, no, I don't want that, I don't need that for whatever reason, there's legitimate reasons for that. I have yet to meet a cooking person who says, no, don't give me any vinegar, I don't know what to do with that. So with all that vinegar you end up with, you can find people who will take it from you.
I will always take vinegar.
Always, always.
Exactly. Other thoughts or questions? This is pretty short. I intended to go longer, but this is good enough. Well, if no, then
Missed the
yeah.
we missed the setup in the beginning. Actually, we didn't get to see the heat pad or the styrofoam.
Oh, well, I will go back in there because I'll put these under the.
Perfect.
I'm gonna have to do 2 trips because my assistants don't have hands. But I will switch my camera view. We'll go back in there and we'll look at all of that again. Here we go. You can see part of my house.
And all your hardwood floors.
Yep, that was after the fire. That was one of the things we insisted on. It's like, no, we're going to spend some of that money and put hardwood in. All right, so just a regular old styrofoam container. You can see I have a few things in there already. There's the Prosecco and 2 different apple ciders. I didn't really talk about that. When I'm using Stella Artois apple cider for my apple cider vinegar. And then I've started making my own apple ciders and turning those into vinegar as well as having apple cider. So there's different flavors. That Stella Artois is a very nice mix, I think. It has a really good apple flavor. My own ciders need some work yet, but they're getting there. This particular setup, I can usually fit 6 jars in there. So like I said, it's just a seed germination pad with a controller. I think that was about 20 bucks. I do have another one. I can't really try to show you a little bit. And it's black on dark. But I have a smaller one wrapped around the 2-gallon jug, trying to get that 2 gallons of liquid to be somewhat warm. Here's the controller. It's at 76. So not bad. I would prefer it a little higher, but it's doing the job. In the winter, I'll put it next to the radiator over here, try to get the heat in it. Anything else in here you want to see?
I have a question. Have you ever made vinegar out of mead?
Absolutely. Good question. So there are 2 gallons of mead. One is for my student, because I was teaching her how to do it. The other will undoubtedly become mead vinegar on its own. Mead vinegar is extremely tasty. Let's see if I can get this in shot. This way. So here's a tiny bit of mead vinegar. That's a half-pint jar, I think. So yes, mead vinegar is definitely something you do. Anything alcoholic except for Malort seems to work. Or like we said, absinthe probably doesn't work either. But with everything else, don't spend a ton of money. You want to take Napoleon brandy and turn it into vinegar, that's on you. But it should be something that you would be willing to drink, even if you weren't going to turn it into vinegar.
What if we had non-alcoholic cider that we wanted to turn into vinegar?
Well, you can't really do that. You have to have alcohol. So you can take a sweet cider, turn it into a hard cider, and then turn it into vinegar. Yes, absolutely. I'm trying to think if there's anything else to show you guys in here. And there are some other books that are somewhat interesting, but not necessarily related. I'm trying to find recipes for shrubs. So Vinegar Revival, Drinks and Cocktails Infusing Flavors helps with that. Way in the back, there's a book called Herbal Vinegars. That's really just infusing things into vinegar. So I don't do a lot of that because it's more cooking than making the vinegar. But hey, if you need a recipe or you need some ideas of what to put into a particular vinegar, that's not a bad book to go for that. And just so, like I said, I reuse a lot of the jars, so I want to show some of those. Like, so this jar, oops, where is it? There we go. It says rice wine vinegar, but I actually put an apple cider in it. You can take sake and actual rice wine, make those into vinegars as well. Higher strength sakes treat just like a wine, water it down a little bit. Low strength rice wine that you might use for cooking from your Asian store, that's usually 6%, 6 to 8%, so you don't need to water that down at all. Other questions or thoughts?
Do the mothers need to be kept in the dark at all, or can they be out wherever the vinegar is?
No, I don't think they need to be kept in the dark. I generally just keep them on that shelf so they're out of the way. It just happens to be in the dark, but no, it doesn't need to be in the dark. All right, well, if there are no more questions, then I appreciate you guys showing up. If you go to my blog, what's your blog? I gotta find it, and I can't remember the address without my business card. One second. All right, it's not easily searchable, but if you go to my Facebook, it should be part of my profile. Oh, here it is. Here it is. It's http://Oswyn's Musings. Oh, and Odette just put it in the chat. Thank you, Odette.
Paste it.
Yes, you get an a.broomstitch.com. So if you go to the class notes section, you'll find the class notes for my vinegar classes, and that'll go through the history and go through the process and writing for you. And I blog about vinegar quite often, so you can probably find answers to most of your questions just by perusing my vinegar blogs. Well, I appreciate
Blogging. Knew it.
All right, well, thank you so much for showing up. Hopefully this is something you guys will enjoy. It's easy. If I do it, it has to be easy. And but like I said, it's almost always appreciated by our cooking friends. And it's a good way to take care of leftover alcohol for whatever reason you can't think of it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, thanks.